Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am so excited to have you here with us today because let's face it, as marketers, we like to say that we're data-driven, and it's never been easier to collect signals. But it's gotten to the point where we're actually drowning in them. And with that, we've added a layer of complexity because between our data and what we're hearing from sales, this doesn't always match up with what's real for our buyers. And that disconnect slows everything down. And that's really why we're here today. So at Predictive, we use our revenue activation framework to connect those dots. So it's a four-step process we use to unify the data, identify the best opportunities, so all of the accounts as well as their buyer committees, prioritize them based on the signals that are actually real, and then activate them. So today we're focusing on those first two steps, unifying the data and identifying those opportunities, because this is where we can create clarity for our entire revenue team. So if you've ever wondered, I don't know how to decipher all of these data points and signals, or why can't my sales team see what I see, then this is for you. And that's really why we've brought together Kristen, who is the head of marketing at Peridio, and Michael, who is the CMO at Peak NIL, because they are living the scenario and honestly, they are crushing it. So I'm so excited to have both of you here today.
Thanks for having
Thanks,
me.
Lindsay.
I'm excited.
Yeah. So before you can decide the direction your entire revenue team should move in, you need to figure out which signals really mean something. And Michael, you've said that your challenge isn't too little data, it's actually too much. So, what's the first thing you look for when deciding which signals actually matter?
Yeah, and it's funny, even since we've had that first conversation, which I think was only, 6 months ago, um, I think I've had time to reflect and a lot has changed. But, and I think about it now, and I think if you made me, I still don't think I would give any of it up. I think that if you said you have to give up some of this first or third party data, I think you'd say like pry it from my cold dead fingers. But it is a lot, right? And it's hard to know, what's important and what's not. And I think more importantly, it's kind of like hard to know like what should we act on now and what should we kind of like put off to the side for and wait on until later, or maybe think about like combining this with the more important data. And so for me, I thought about this question a lot in the last couple of days, and I think there's really like this clear quality order. There's this order of data and signals that I think about. And I think about like the trigger is when would I give this to sales? And like not really like when would I pass this off to the sales team and say this is where I think we should be focusing? And for me, the sales team and I have always worked like in lockstep. It's never like me saying, okay, here's a thing, go chase it. It's really us getting together and working very closely and saying, what do we think is the most important thing to chase? So the order for that is I think it used to be there was leads like MQLs, like, somebody comes in, they fill out a form, they request a demo, maybe they use a free product or a PLG product. And then there's like first party signals. So someone visited your site, maybe you can see them through like a Warmly or an RB2B, or you can see them through like like your own first party data. Or you can see your site app, like free app data or something like that. And these days that might be a lot better than an MQL, just depending on what the context is. So if you have like a very specific use case page on your site, and then you have a very specific prospect that visits that, I think that might be a lot better in some cases than maybe like someone downloading a white paper or someone, signing up for your blog. Then there's first party research data. If I'm in the pharmaceutical space and I go out and I research like who is, signing up for trials, like clinical trials or something like that. That'd be like first party data and like going like maybe that's I would say that's maybe that third tier. And then there's channels, and then there's third party signals like from Zoom Info and Apollo and List and everything else. And I kind of think of them in that order. And just like anything else, like in marketing and revenue, it's like once you've done one and you've kind of exhausted that first one, then you get to the next one, and then you get to the next one, and then you get to the next one. So I think the first thing is to just make sure you have a clear understanding of what are those striations of information and signals that you have so that you know where to focus on.
Yeah, that's really interesting too because we've we've talked about this internally. Like our buyers don't have to go to our site anymore. They can do that research off-site. So having those indicators that they're actually visiting yours is actually pretty strong these days. And Michael, you touched on some of those tools that might help, but Kristen, you've really built that unified visibility without a massive stack. So, how do you create this single trustworthy view without a ton of tech debt?
Yeah. So, I mean, I started at Peridio, which is a seed stage startup about a year ago, and I started there before we had a product. And so for me, I already knew going in, I have like the opposite problem of Michael, right? Like he's got a lot of data. I'm like, where is the data? Do we have any data? And so I think when I stepped into this role, I think one way that I've thought about it differently in this role than I have anywhere else is I was thinking less about the tools and more about the process. And so I would encourage anyone that's on this right now to be thinking about less about what are the cool kids using and more about like what is the absolute most valuable data that we need that if we had it at our disposal, we could be really effective. And so we kind of started with the process and then tried to do a work back into the tools to manage that. And so for us, when I was thinking about like, I can't use all of these tools to extract all of these signals all over the place, like what could I extract from? For me, it's really sales transcripts. And I've talked a lot about these. I still think that it's probably like the best source of data that any team could use. And so for us, it was okay, how do we get that data easily, quickly, and automate it and make sure that it's reliable? And so we started with a very, very lean stack, and it's the same stack that we use today. And it's probably like the one AI workflow that I repeatedly use and have for the last like 7 months. And so that says to me that it matters. It says to me that it's important. And so for us, we use Fathom, which records and transcribes all of our calls. Then we use Zapier to pipe all of those calls into Cursor. We've got like a foldering structure in there where we basically have a parent folder that says raw transcripts. And then we just feed in each transcript by date and name of company. And so Fathom, Zapier, Cursor, that's it. And then in Cursor, you can choose which LLM you want to use. So like most marketers, I feel like we all kind of feel comfortable with ChatGPT and Claude. I feel like those are our babies. Those are the ones that we always use. Those are readily available in Cursor, but you could use Grok if you're feeling spicy. You could use Gemini. And so we basically filter everything in. So I'm not logging into Fathom. I'm not pulling things down, going into tools. It's just they're ready for me to go. I just open Cursor and I've got a prompt that we used to basically build this like living, breathing ICP document organized by persona, pain point, then what is our value prop against that pain point? Is it strong? Is it not strong? And then pulling actual customer quotes from calls that ladder up to those pain points in their voice. Because for me, I work in a very technical space. Our ICP are engineers. I don't talk like an engineer at all. And it's really, really helpful to see their language because it's so different than how I would speak or how I would write our stuff. And so I feel like the thing that I'm going to say is controversial, but like our single source of truth is not a dashboard. It's really like the customer's voice that we're able to extract with very little resources on a budget that's like $100 a month. And we've since layered in, an outbound tool called Unify, that's pretty cool that has like some more advanced signals. But for us, like I'm very much like a marketing fundamentalist, like basics. And there's so much value that we get from that even now. It's shaping our product roadmap, it's shaping how we write content, it's shaping the direction of our go-to-market strategy. And so yeah, we've done it on a really lean stack, and it's probably the most reliable tool set as a marketer that I've used for an extended period of time that I go back to weekly to refine. And I feel like we chase a lot of tools as marketers. We do a lot of trials, we burn through a lot of credits doing things that don't really matter. And so that was just like that's like our tried and true tech stack right now that seems to give us everything that we need to be dangerous and get things done.
Yeah, and so you both have brought up sales. So it's not just about the quantitative data, but it's also about the qualitative that you get from sales. So how does sales feedback help shape that unified view?
I can jump in and
You
say,
want to start?
yeah, I would say, I mean, like the sales feedback to me is like the most important thing that exists in making your data actionable. I think dashboards, no matter how wonderful we think they are, they're good at showing the what, but I have never gone on a call with a sales team and not had a little bit of a spat of, but it says this. And then the salesperson says,
Mhm.
well, not really. We actually met them at a show 2 years ago and you weren't. And it's just like, if we can eliminate that, that would be great. And so for me, I think like the best thing that we can do, um, and the best way that we can get that qualitative is to pick up a phone and hop on a call with your sales team. And so, I know that that's something that we're pretty religious about here at Peridio. Things can sometimes get messy in Slack channels and async, but like when you hop on a call, there's so much like nuance and context that you learn that you just cannot pick up from signals. And there have been a couple times at Peridio where, the Christmas lights are going, they're flashing, they're saying like, this is the lead, everyone stop what you're doing, do stuff with them, go spend time with them, sales. And then sales has one call and they're like, something just didn't feel right. And then we learned there was a reorg or like something happened that the timing's not right, that feels completely contrary to all this data that we surfaced that said to us, like, this is a home run. Um, and so, yeah, I think engagement doesn't equal readiness. And so that readiness really comes from actually talking to salespeople who are having those conversations and are revealing these little detailed moments that are actually the things that matter the most, I would say.
I couldn't agree more with you, Kristen. Like on just the sentiment of just getting on the phone with the
Mm.
sales team and just spending time together. Um, I think the thing that I wrote down about this was I think it doesn't really ever work when there's the marketing team essentially deciding that these are the targets. And I think we approached this question kind of from different angles. And I was really thinking about the data of like the very top of the funnel, like what are the signals that tell us who to chase? And I was thinking about that too from the marketing perspective of like, all right, we've identified signal A, signal B, signal C, or like combination of A, B, and C. And then if you just pass that information down to the sales team and say, here's a bucket of people to chase that did signal A, and here's a bucket of B and a bucket of C, and then you hand that to them, it's really not going to, I find that's never really worked. Because if it works out and you get like a better response rate than you usually get, well, they're not going to like come around, pat you on the back and say like, really good job, guys, that was great. Let's go do it again next quarter and like keep that up. But when an event inevitably doesn't work, it's going to be, all right, well, that didn't work. We're going to let's go back to the old way. Let's go back to the old way of doing things. So I think that the thing that you said that really resonated with me is just like get together and just do things together, get on the phone. And then for me, it's when you're deciding who to target and why. And as it relates to picking the signals to target. So if you're using first party data, third party data, a combination of those things, and choosing those signals or doing research and finding a group of 5,000 targets to do, to market to or to target with the sales team. Just make sure you're in the same room when you're doing that. And so
Mhm.
everybody has, skin in the game and shared responsibility. I think that's just the most important thing for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found was so interesting in getting our sales and marketing teams to talk and not just about like, here's what's in the pipeline. And we co-created a persona GPT together. So we did this mini 90-minute hackathon, and it just opened up this line of communication that we didn't and like questions and statements that hadn't been talked about before because it was more about like building this persona together and they pulled in just recent call information and people that they've talked to and it was just a really cool way to get talking with the sales team in a non-traditional kind of way. So I would definitely recommend that to anyone who's maybe if you're stuck with your sales team, just having kind of going around in circles in the same calls, like try it
Yes.
out a
And when
different way.
when you're together, the conversation now is the marketer says, here's the data that I'm seeing. And
Hmm.
sales says, but here's what I'm seeing. And then together you can say, okay, what does this actually mean for us together? And that's
Yeah.
like such an important part of the alignment that again, like Michael's saying, like we're all saying, you can't get that from just hopping on a Slack thread in a
Hmm.
in a sales channel where something popped up. You know what I mean? Like that just doesn't,
Yeah.
you can't attack it in the same way.
Nothing beats those live discussions. As much
Nothing.
as we don't want to put more meetings on the calendar, those
I know.
those live sessions definitely beat anything else. So I think to round out this, what we're really talking about is unifying all of those signals isn't about collecting more signals, even though we might not want to say no to any more data, but it's more about bringing in sales and agreeing on what's real
Mhm.
because the unifying the data doesn't magically reveal who's buying, but it does help remove some of that noise. And this is where that data really becomes direction. And then, Michael, whenever I was talking to you, you talked about use case marketing to interpret signals. So, how do you translate raw data into clear, prioritized use cases?
Yeah, so I think that it's if you can do it, I think it's a really good thing to be able to parse out the use case that, a person or an account or just a signal is trying to get to. Like if you're, I really like that. I really like Instantly, the cold outbound company. And I think one of the things that I liked about them instantly, wow, that was really stupid. Nobody got that joke. Maybe I think
I
Kristen
did.
got it. Now Lindsay's getting it.
I
Um,
giggled.
That was a dad joke.
I'm
That was a
a
dad
dad.
joke, everybody. That was a dad joke.
One of the things I liked about them immediately is that I went to this page and they had this. This is like an unpaid promotion for Instantly. They had this page where they had all of these use cases laid out, and I was like, okay, obviously this is really, really good. And they had all of the very specific things that they did, and some of them were like pretty, revolutionary for cold outbound. And I'm thinking like, okay, they totally are going to own SEO for this. Like the LLMs are going to eat this up. And then they were all YouTube videos as well. And so the YouTube videos were getting like tons and tons of content. But then on top of that, like every time somebody had visit the page, you get first party data on that, and you can kind of like see and separate all these use cases. And so I was thinking, oh, this is really, really good, and they've done a good job with this. And then the thing I'm thinking was, it's just like anything else with I think with marketing and a lot of things that we do, there's always like this point of diminishing returns if like you try to do too much and then it stops being all that useful. And I feel like I've had this conversation with every CEO that I've ever worked with where you start to work with them and they go, we need to have an ICP for like we need to have like 15 different ICPs and 15 different messages. We need to have 15 different use cases and 15 different messages and 10 different verticals. And then you have this insane like three-dimensional matrix with 100 different messages and then what then nobody realizes that to do that right you have to have all 100 of those messaging like going on in perpetuity for like the rest of your life to continue to market the company, which is impossible. And
Yeah.
so yes, I think being able to find and bucket like a few different really killer use cases and then bucket the signals that you can get from wherever they come from into those use cases is really important and good. But then know that for every one of those use cases that you have to create specific actions that happen downstream of those, whether it's messaging or the materials that you give the sales team or the videos that you create or the products that you have to sell to those people. So I think it's a matter of like being conservative about how many of those you think you can take on. So I remember having that conversation, and at the time I was like all geeked out about these use cases, and like 6 months later, I've like tried to activate on some of that, and then learn some lessons about how much a startup can take on when
Yes.
they get excited about use cases. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah. Yeah,
Totally.
definitely. And Kristen, you focus on behaviors that signal readiness. So,
Mhm.
what are some of those behavioral patterns you consider proof that an account is ready for sales?
Yeah. It's so funny because Michael, like, yes, you learn it by getting it wrong. So I would say the signals we've learned it by getting it wrong, and it made me think of we had signed up for a clay trial and I saw one of the signals. It was like, they recently got funding. And I'm like, if they got funding, they have money, and money means they can buy things. This is great. And I burned through like 3,500 credits and just took money and lit it on fire. And that was the end. And so I feel like, yeah, we're all in this like weird vortex of like, there's so many signals. How do you pinpoint them? And I like, Michael, what you said earlier, where you're like, you have signal A, you have signal B, you have signal C. And the way that we try to think about it is like, if a few of those converge in a meaningful way, then all of a sudden that feels like very green lit for us. And so a couple of the like very specific things that we look for in behaviors, one is like multiple stakeholder engagement. So I feel like Lindsay, we talked about this a lot for your report that you guys did. For us, like we're a very technical platform, so engineers use us. They very rarely are making that purchasing decision. So we need to have multiple people in the room, and we just like know that early on. So for us, if we see like, hey, an engineer is poking around in the documentation, but like this business person or someone on the product side is like perusing our website and we've got like multiple stakeholders, like that's a really good like green flag behavior for us. Again, we're very technical. So for us, like our doc site, so when engineers start poking around in like deeper levels of our documentation, I'm being very specific on purpose so that if there's anyone here that can start to like contextualize this for their own use case, it's valuable. But if somebody goes to our docs and they don't just look at like what is Avocado OS, which is our product, and they go and they look at like a very particular NVIDIA board, all of a sudden we know, okay, they're probably building a product on that piece of hardware. We know things now. That helps us like zero in on the pain points that people who build their experience. And then the third thing that we look at, this is what I dub it internally. Like the name has not caught on and nobody cares, but I call it the question shift. And so we have a Discord community that's like an open community for engineers to just bash your stuff, love your stuff. It's wild, it's crazy, it scares me, but we're there, we have it, it's public. And when the conversation in there starts to go from like, what is this thing you do? And is it compatible to this? And it shifts to, well, how does your thing work with my thing? So like when the conversation or chatter goes from like your capabilities to more like logistics, that feels like a really important signal. And so like the best fit things for us, like the things where I'm like, okay, no, I could actually pass this to sales and this feels really good, is when those things converge. And so I think like Michael hit this earlier of like you've got these different signals and it's starting to think about like how can you layer those together that tell a really, really impactful story that's when it becomes compelling for the sales team, I think.
Yeah, and I love that. So you're talking about this handoff, Michael. How do you determine when you have enough evidence for a marketing to sales handoff? Is there a threshold that indicates like this is real?
Yeah,
And
I mean, I
don't
think
say
that,
lead score.
and sorry, what did you say, Kristen?
I said, and don't say lead score.
I think I might have written that down earlier and then actually deleted it.
Yeah, okay, okay.
Uh, yeah, sorry, HubSpot. So they just did their lead score
Mhm.
module. Somebody built that product. So I think that, obviously like that depends a ton on the company and the nuance. And, like I was saying earlier, like it used to just be like, this is an MQL because somebody filled out a form and they're a prospect and they're the type that we care about. And now like you can basically create a signal for anything that you want under the sun. Like you can use N8N or Clay or ChatGPT, or you can build a Frankenstein, like by the way, a rad Frankenstein, like Kristen did with
Mhm.
Cursor and Claude and things like that. And so you can create all these crazy things, but then I think you have to just decide with your sales team like what makes sense. So if like a really obvious and kind of dumb one is if I see the brand director of like Nike or Viore on the Peak NIL website, like so really quick, like Peak NIL connects brands with athletes so that they can do NIL deals. And so really obvious is if I see a brand director at like a retailer or a clothing brand on my website on the right page, I mean, I want to give that to a salesperson immediately. That's a super strong signal, and I think it's better than a lot of traditional MQLs. But then if you could create any number of other things with Clay or whatever, like or with something homegrown. I think you just have to sit with the rest of the team and decide where's the threshold where this goes from being just something that gets logged in the CRM to being something that says, okay, let's have somebody go and spend real time on this. So I think it's just a human conversation.
Yeah, I
Mm.
was going to add to the human conversation, the threshold that I use, and it's like very scary for marketers, but I think it's so important for alignment, is I think to myself, I have this like internal dialogue where I'm like, could I sit on our weekly BD call and could I tell my sales team why this company needs us right now? And my answer couldn't be, they downloaded that white paper. They opened that email 47 times. Like, that is not a story. It's not
Yeah.
compelling. Sales would just eat me alive. But if I could go to the call and say, hey guys, so we've got this robotics company, and I see that there's an engineer who's poking around our docs, and I also saw that this like product leader is liking all of our posts on LinkedIn right now about NVIDIA. Maybe this is something we should sniff out. That becomes much more compelling. And so that's why again, like I think the conversation is so important because I'm like, okay, if I'm willing to risk personal ridicule in front of the sales team and put myself out there and say, here's why I think, I know I'm going to get very honest feedback of yes or no. And then I'm like
Mhm.
infinitely better the next time at spotting the things that I need to know. And so that's like the weird little dance that we do. And like the amount of rejection that I have experienced by doing that has been so helpful and great learning. So, yeah.
And I think that's part of it too, is marketing can't just say, like they hit this lead score or they downloaded this and attended this so that they make it over that threshold. It's more about, okay, here's why I think they're a fit because of their actual like demographic info, but also their engagement. And here's how you message to that. There needs to be more of a recipe, not just like this buffet of data and information and go and do whatever you want with it. Here it is. I'm just gonna throw it over the fence and hopefully
Mhm.
that sticks for you.
Mhm.
When
Um,
you're something you said that I thought was pretty interesting, like when you're selling to enterprise, Kristen, I think you are like I think that you have to, you said, you kind of made me think of this. You're combining a bunch of signals at the account level, and then I think you were saying this earlier. You combine all these signals, and then certain somewhere in there, there's a threshold, right? And like when you're combining a bunch of signals that are all these different things, and there's no structure for how to kind of add and subtract different signals. I think that's kind of like why lead score exists, which is kind of like an imperfect science. Like this is worth 5, and this is worth 10, and this is worth negative 100, and this is like, and so I think that's kind of like there should be. I don't know what the better solution for it is, but I have found that sometimes lead score on an account is kind of like the best I've been able to do on like
Pointing you in
an
a
ac-
direction of
yeah.
saying like, okay, there's something here. It might still be junk, but like this is a cleaner pool of potential than it would be just Sherlock Holmes, like
But I
Sherlock.
but I am curious about what everybody else does in that world. If it's like, no, 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 when we see, a tier one with a tier one, it's like we think that's really, really good. We don't care if it's like reaches 100 points or whatever. I'd just be curious about it, whether people are doing, when they're combining signals on an account level and where their thresholds are if it's not using lead scores.
so we like for us specifically, we do have scores. I think those are we like to talk about in marketing that like everything is dead and it's like this big running joke. And I think it's a great indicator like you're talking about. And it's something that constantly has to keep evolving and you keep having to update because all of those different signals don't necessarily, when they add up and we see it in our nice dashboards, it's not necessarily in order of what our sales teams should go after. So I think for us, we do use it, but it's not, the end all be all. This is what you have to go after because it's in the CRM. I don't know, Kristen, do you have a
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is an element of combining, in your case, scoring with a human layer. For us, there is like a human investigative layer into all of it. We do have a CRM, but I would say in terms of like surfacing those signals in a way that feels meaningful and that feels like very specific so that we're not like wasting our time, we use a tool called Unify, and that's fairly recent for us. And that's a way for us to at least say, like, okay, if there are 100 people in our purview, which is what scoring, I guess, is supposed to be for. Here are 25 that we think you should look at. But when we narrow it down to 25, like we're looking at all of those line by line. And that feels painful and maybe it's not tenable at scale. But like the conversion rates that we experience are higher than any other place I've ever worked. And there's a part of me where I'm like, I think it's because there is a lot of automation, there's a lot of AI slop, and we're all craving to actually talk to humans. And so I think there is like a natural, like investigative manual labor that we all have to do in order to make sure that like we're focusing on the right things.
Kristen, there was a question that came in earlier before we move on. It was talking about your like de-anonymized visibility of multiple stakeholders. So you were talking about how you need more of that buyer committee to be
Mhm.
engaged, and those are green lights for you. So the question is curious how or if you're getting de-anonymized visibility of multiple stakeholders showing engagement, like your engineers and business operations.
Yeah, yeah. So we do in two ways. One is through Unify, which is sort of like a go-to-market outbound tool. We looked at a lot of different tools. All of them were like way too expensive for us for where we're at. And so it does a really good job of actually finding the right personas within those target companies. So that's one way that we see it. And then honestly, like I watch everything on social. So like I'm looking at like who is following our company page, who is engaging with content, and I can start to see like this cast of characters that emerge. And so there is definitely like some manual investigative work that
Mhm.
happens. And so there's some automation on the Unify outbound tool side, and then and some in our CRM we use HubSpot. And then some that's happening just manually by like looking and seeing like, okay, this thing popped up over here that's automated and I just happen to be looking and notice that someone else from that company. And again, they're top of mind because I'm meeting with sales once a week. And they're
Mhm.
saying the names of the companies out loud and they're talking and because they're explaining pain points and like you remember
Yeah.
better than a bunch of like automated messages in Slack that you're not going to remember those company names. And so they become very top of mind and our TAM is smaller and more niche and so we don't have as many leads to sift through and as many companies to sift through. So
Mhm.
that's like a weird luxury that makes that a little bit easier to do it manual.
Yeah. So I think that lends itself really nicely to another question we got, which is identifying those buyer signals to such an in-depth level is great, but how realistic is it? Or how do you do that at scale? As a marketer, I don't have time to chase sales with these potential buyers showing multiple signals. I think both of you probably have a insight into that one. Is there, Michael,
I
do you
mean,
want to kick us off?
yeah, I mean, it depends on what the signal is. So, I mean, for example, I mean, that takes tools. Like, I think that I kind of hate the idea of like that you need tools that cost $4.99 a month to do stuff.
Mhm.
It kind of like drives me nuts. It irks me that like you have to have those. But I mean, somebody built that software to do a certain thing. And it does a really good job of it. So like, Warmly does a good job of that. Clay does a really good job of that. Unify does a great job of that. Like these tools, like they do that at scale. And then if you're really sophisticated, you can use like N8N to do that, or hire somebody on Upwork to use N8N to do that. But I do that a lot. Like I hire people on Upwork to build essentially like workflows that will identify certain signals at scale in Clay or something like that. Like I was like, okay, I wonder if I can identify it every time someone does something very specific on X, who is from this kind of company, you know, if somebody's from this kind of company and they say something very specific on X, I want to identify that and then I want to check them against the CRM, find out if they have account manager, and then ping that account manager on Slack and create an MQL. Like that sort of thing you can do with Clay or with, N8N or something like that. So that you can create at scale with an automation and then just teach it to just run forever and then just tinker with it to just make sure it's not making a bunch of mistakes. So like that's what I would say. And if you don't know how to do that, you're not alone. Like 99.9% of us don't know how to do that. So I would get on Upwork and find somebody who does, like a GTM engineer, which I also kind of hate saying because I feel like it's just like a marketed term, but
Poor
like find
engineers, our poor engineers. Yeah.
find an engineer who knows how to make that and then just make it and see if it works.
The only thing that I would add is like two things. One is if I hear chase sales, that says to me that maybe there's a lack of alignment. There's something going on there. If you feel like you're chasing sales and probably like you need to come together to define that a little bit better. The other thing that I would say too for marketers, like I'm part of a little AI marketing group of just people on LinkedIn that I really respect and like their stuff, and they're in a similar, position as me being like a startup marketer, and we meet and we talk about these things. And so I would also just say like we're all figuring this out in real time. Like I've learned things from Michael on this panel that I'm like, oh, whoa, okay. Do I know signals? And so I think like talking to each other, reaching out to like other marketers, reaching out to us afterwards, and just like having conversations about it of like, what is the best way to solve it? What are the tools that you're using? Feel like that's the best way to start to like zero in on this because yeah, there is so much nuance. We all have different personas that care about different things. We're trying to capture different information and it's not always one to one. But getting together and doing things like this and having these conversations is really important.
Yeah, I totally
Well
agree.
said.
And Michael, I think this next question was a a little bit brought on because of something you said earlier, like which signals deserve attention now versus later. So before we moved on to figuring out the quality and um, how we align with our sales teams, this question was, how do you decide which signals deserve attention now versus later? Is that prioritization consistent across all accounts, or does it change for enterprise and SMB segments?
Yeah, I mean I think that's a cool question. Like, I think one of the things that we ended up doing when as we get like really technical and as we do crazier stuff with AI, as we start to get pretty robotic, and we kind of like forget that there's like people on the other end of this stuff, these things like doing things. And
Mhm.
so then if you can kind of just like put yourself in the head of try to like remember what like marketers used to do, which is like, you know, like we used to try to understand like the wants and needs of, what people wanted, and and try to do value props and things like that. So if we can kind of understand like what is the driving force behind the signal, then I think that we can kind of understand, what is a priority signal and what is not. So I mean, it's kind of hard for me to think of an example, but I mean, I guess it's like, um, I don't know, maybe somebody can help me out. But I mean, if you can identify like these little signals that are popping up, like for Zoom in, for example, like third party data, like ZoomInfo is telling you that Cisco is sort of searching for B2B SaaS companies like yours because of their data. It's like, I don't care. Like, I don't care at all. Like there's like, that is so obtuse. That's not useful to me at all. Like throw it away. It doesn't mean anything to me. But if I see somebody on like a complete dumb example, if I see somebody on LinkedIn asking about their favorite very specific, tools that I sell, like that's obviously like the complete other end of that spectrum, which is a very highly uh, targeted, like a very important signal. So somewhere in between, there's all these things. But I know I would just try to think of one, can I imagine the human on the other end, and then can I scale that signal to the point where I can make it automated and get 100 of them a month.
Mm.
Yeah. So I know we are getting close to wrapping things up, and we've talked a lot about signals and behaviors, but none of this sticks if the humans behind it, more specifically, sales and marketing, aren't aligned. So we talked a lot about incorporating sales insights with the data we have. And Kristen, your weekly feedback sessions with sales sound pretty critical to everything that you do. So how do those conversations change your shared definition of quality?
Yeah. So we're a smaller team and we have two meetings a week that I think about like if we were 150 person company, like I would want this to still happen. But every Monday our executive team meets and we talk through. So it's like product, marketing, engineering, or CEO. And we just run through like priorities, where we're at, what's top of mind. It's a very like leadership down meeting. And there's always a little trail of breadcrumbs that gets laid there where you start to like, okay, the sales team will start talking about this thing. Okay, that's interesting. I've earmarked it. And then Tuesdays we have like a BD stand up, and it's like it's sales and marketing, and it's line by line every partnership deal that's in the queue, every integrator deal that's in the queue, and every customer deal that's in the queue. The entire fun, like the entire life cycle of our ecosystem, and we go through each one. Like, where is it at? What is the next step? Um, how did the conversation go from the last time that we spoke? And it's like, what changes in a week? Like, blows my mind. Like, things that felt
Mhm.
like there's no way that this is going to amount to anything escalates in a way that I cannot even predict. And then things that I was like, this is closing. We're gone. And you're like, what? How? What? And so again, like we've talked about this, like this idea of meeting as a team as being so important. Like every time I hop on that call, I walk away with a nugget that then informs our go-to-market strategy and how we're building content and like the nuance and the subtleties that I'm adding to social, how I'm like articulating certain problems, even if it's the same problem, if there's like a different angle to it that we hadn't thought about. So yeah, it informs everything and changes the definition of quality. And I think for me, because we're articulating who we are while we're still becoming it, because we just launched a
Mhm.
product in 6 months or 6 months ago, I think the other thing that we learned is sometimes like our definition of quality sways either way depending on like seasonality. Like if we're in a like a low peak season, sometimes we're a little bit more lax about like our definition of quality. And so again, like having those meetings to be able to like have really frank conversations around like we don't have the lead volume that we had around that event. What are we going to do? We shift the signals. Then it's okay, maybe this thing that we wouldn't have looked at 45 days ago is something that we're willing to look at now. And sometimes those things amount to customers, and that always blows my mind. And so, again, like the real-time feedback, things change so quickly. And I think that that can be true not just for startups, but for more established companies as well. And so, like making it a priority to get on the phone and have that time to exchange feedback, it completely changes the definition of what is quality for sure.
Yeah. So to wrap this up, Michael, you can kick us off here. If you had to define a quality opportunity in one sentence, what would it be?
I really tried to do just one sentence. I said, anything that isn't cold.
Yep. Yep. Okay.
All right, Kristen, what about you?
I would say, okay, so like if I was giving like a true definition that's very descriptive, I would say that a qualified opportunity is someone who is an ICP fit that has a problem that we can solve, who is looking to solve it right now. Or like conversely, like if I was to do it more of like how I feel, I would say that like a quality opportunity is a company that's sort of at a make or break inflection point where doing nothing costs more than doing something or changing. And so that's at least what we see a lot of. It's like the light bulb moment of like we're engaged in a conversation. We've had multiple conversations with a prospect, and we can just tell that they know deep in their soul, like if I don't do something different, it's going to be bad. And like that always feels like a more human marker of like, okay, we can help. We can actually like be a hero here. We can help this person be a hero in their organization. That's usually the signal for us to
Yeah,
just lean in and try to get the job done.
perfect. Well, we started in chaos, wondering what was real, questioning how sales feedback actually ties into the data, and now we're ending in clarity. So, understanding which signals are worth paying attention to and aligning sales under a shared truth. So, I think the thought I'll leave everyone with is, most teams focus on whatever is the loudest or the easiest to measure because it looks really nice in a dashboard. But like we talked about, sometimes the most valuable opportunities don't announce themselves. You have to uncover them through both the data and those live sales calls. So if you want help seeing more of those opportunities, we would love to talk with you. And thank you so much, Kristen and Michael, for being here. This was so much fun. And I think everyone here got a lot of insight from both of you. So thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
having me.
you.
This was so
Excellent.
much fun. It
I
It was
know.
great.
It was
awesome, guys. Thanks. I
all
learned a
right.
lot.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.